Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Friday, and it's been a heck of a week, even for those of us who had the luxury of only watching the international news, the war in Europe, instead of those who are living through it. And on Fridays, BookTube tends to take a collective breath and talk about books, about reading plans, about reading accomplishments for the week. Uh, in their Friday Reads videos, which I really, really like. I've been watching those videos more often lately for the sheer respite that they give me from doom scrolling. And I often don't make conventional Friday Reads of my own because I do a lot of reading. It's pretty much, aside from taking care of my little dog, it's pretty much all that I do. This has been a very, very healthy reading week. Very healthy, even by my standards. But I did want to talk about a handful of books with you today. And I've got the covers all lined up here on the iPad. They are not murder mysteries, and they are not mammoths. The two reading events that are stomping all over BookTube in a very wonderful way this week, this month, is March Mystery Madness, where we celebrate murder mysteries, and March of the Mammoths, where we celebrate longer books. I don't think either one of these, any of these qualify. One or two of them might come close on one way or another. But I wanted to put them on your radar. They are forthcoming books. They are forthcoming either forthcoming from me or books that I have read and in advance copy and will read again when I get finished copies. So I thought we'd go over them together. just a little bit more of the relief that Friday Read videos tend to be. So the first one that we'll do is a book that you wouldn't think, if you watch this channel, you might not think I would be interested in, but you'd be dead wrong. I am interested in almost everything, but this thing, absolutely. This is by John McCourt, and it's Consuming Joyce. 100 Years of Ulysses in Ireland. This is a textual reception study, but I have heard, I haven't actually read it, but I have heard that it's marvelously readable, marvelously done. And it's all about exactly what the title hints at, just how people have received and read James Joyce's Ulysses, not Steve Donoghue's Ulysses, but James Joyce's Ulysses over the centuries since it came out. We saw a big centennial illustrated edition of Ulysses that came out just recently. All sorts of celebrations, that sort of thing. Textual reception, things like that. I don't care what the text is, obviously, right? There have been a few books about Ulysses in the last 10 years, and I've read them eagerly and liked some of them. Then we move on to science fiction. This is Adrian Tchaikovsky, a name that if you're a science fiction fan, if you don't know this name, you really should investigate this name because you would really like this stuff, I think. This is classic space opera, and this is Eyes of the Void, which is the next volume in this series about the architects and about humanity fighting against extremely powerful alien race. There's nothing textual reception about this book. There's nothing particularly subtle about it. It is very much hopping on the bandwagon that the Expanse novels sort of refueled, which is classic, gigantic, sprawling space opera, which is a time-honored subgenre of science fiction. It can be really, really enjoyable to read, and it's not meant to discomfort you. Outlaw Bookseller on his great BookTube channel mentioned the other day, he was talking about science fiction. He often does talk about science fiction. And at one point he said that science fiction shouldn't make you feel comfortable, that it should make you feel uncomfortable. And that, I think, is more of an indication of the kind of science fiction that he likes than probably what I would call a general precept. There's nothing wrong at all with reading science fiction that doesn't upset your worldview. I don't think. And this is a perfect example of that kind of science fiction. If you're looking for a big, well thought out, sprawling space opera, then this is only book 2. You could definitely get involved with this, and long may it rain, because it's really well done. Then we have a book, I think we saw this on this channel. This is The Insect Crisis, The Fall of the Tiny Empires That Run the World by Oliver Millman. And there they are, all these insects on a pile at the bottom, because the insect world is in serious, serious trouble. Huge population declines that once upon a time, even as recently as 10 years ago, we were being told that the ultimate cause of those population declines wasn't really known. What really is the reason? Of course, when you have a massive population decline or a massive population problem, whether it's the bleaching of coral reefs or white nose infections in hibernating bats, no matter what it is, if it's millions of individuals affected, you know that humans are the reason. Obviously, humans are the reason for the insect crisis. And the point the author makes in this book, among many others, is, and among many profiles of the people who are actually on the front lines learning about this, the point that the author makes in this book is that if there is a sidewise caused human holocaust of insect-eating bats, well, then you'll have more insects. But if there's a sideways caused or directly caused human holocaust of insects in the world, the whole food economy of the world will collapse. They're absolutely essential for life. And if they go, life goes. So a much more interesting, much bigger point there. Then this next one, we may have seen this on this channel before. Some of that will be unavoidable. This is by Megan O'Rourke, and it's called The Invisible Kingdom: Reimagining Chronic Illness. Beautifully written, beautifully done, very, very perceptively written. I can say without any rancor at all, I do recommend the book. I can say without any rancor at all that on a fundamental level, it did not convince me. The author mentions that chronic illnesses that the diagnoses of chronic illness has skyrocketed, percentage-wise, of patients in the 21st century. Skyrocketed. And the author seeks, with a great deal of empathy and, again, a great deal of eloquence, this is a wonderful book to read, to understand that skyrocketing in terms of presentation, in terms of illnesses that are hard to pin down, sometimes in terms of institutional momentum or biases in the medical diagnosis community, that sort of thing. The one element, the one possible avenue for investigating that skyrocketing that this author doesn't do is to investigate whether or not it's real. Whether or not it's real. Whether or not if you have an illness that affects you on alternating Tuesdays or some months worse than others if your job is going poorly, and that has ill-defined symptoms and that no doctor has ever been able to actually detect in your body, it's entirely possible that you are not sick. It's entirely possible in a circumstance like that there is nothing wrong with you, physically speaking. And a study that goes a little broader than this, or that is a little bit willing to entertain this, to entertain that a little bit more strongly than this book does, I would have preferred, but I still thought that this was really good. We have onboarded in the mainstream an attitude about personal claims that I don't like at all. I don't like at all. It gets us onto dodgy political territory, but that's nothing new on this channel, is it? Obviously, I had a problem with a slogan, for instance, circulating around the scandalous elevation of a moron like Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court for life, swirling around his nomination hearings was not only the accusation by a woman who could not remember specifics, but also a kind of slogan that went all around social media. And that slogan was very simple. It was "Believe the women." And the subtext of that slogan was "Believe the women all the time, and it's an insult to ask for proof." And that bothered me, even though Brett Kavanaugh's main accuser could not come up with verifiable specifics. That's understandable. It had been a long time. Even so, I don't think there's a single person in the world, aside from maybe Donald Trump, who watched those hearings and did not believe her. I believed her. That she's not a trained actress. I knew when she was talking about it that something traumatic did happen. I don't know that I would have agreed with taking that as written, as fact, without evidence. I don't like that because that can turn on you. Obviously, that champion an idea of believe the women could turn on just about anybody, including the women, including anyone. Sympathy can be won with the honesty of testimony, with the obvious integrity of testimony. But belief should be a matter of proof, should be a matter of facts. And the people, almost all the people profiled in this book, cannot prove that there's anything medically wrong with them. And saying, well, okay, one after another of you cannot prove, no one can detect anything wrong with your body. But the one option that we're not going to seriously entertain is that you might simply be wrong. No, we're not going to do that, because we're going to believe you. We're going to believe you. The addendum to believe the women was always, you may remember the Kavanaugh hearings, it was a travesty. And you may remember that the addendum to believe the women was, they're risking a lot even by mentioning this, so they're obviously not in it for personal gain. As if personal gain is the only reason why you would make an outlandish claim or even knowingly tell a lie. It just seemed all so simple, and also, of course, fascistic. You're not just suggesting that I believe the women, you're telling me to, or else. An element of that has seeped into our lives, just our general social life. That if someone doesn't go to work, cries all day long, doesn't do any exercise, doesn't eat well, and says the reason why is because they have an illness that no doctor of the 50 they've consulted has ever been able to detect in their body, that, well, why would they say it if it weren't true? Believe them. That's the one element that I wish had been pursued more in this book, is that element of chronic illness. But there are a great number of chronic illnesses that are touched on in this book that are indisputably real, even if they're not fully understood. And this book really does reimagine that world and the way we think about it, the way that we treat it. So if, for instance, one of you, I certainly did not mean to come across as hostile to chronic illness. I just think that, like with mental illness, chronic illness is often wildly overdiagnosed. But if you are dealing with a chronic illness, especially if you have the absolutely maddening headache, as quite a few people in this book do, of dealing with a chronic illness that actually your doctors can't get a handle on, this is for you. If you don't know this is out here, and now you do, and if you're dealing with the reality of that situation, as opposed to the psychopathy of that situation, then you definitely want to read this book. This next one is oversized and pricey, but if it's right in your wheelhouse, you might want to find it. This is by Victoria Kastner, and it is a biography of the architect Julia Morgan. That is one of the buildings that Julia Morgan did. That is one of the few remaining photographs of Julia Morgan. And this is an oversized illustrated thing, and the true feat of it is that Julia Morgan, she was a really good person and a really talented architect, but she also had an absolute horror of biography. It's a gigantic feat that Victoria Kastner was able to write this book at all, because Julia Morgan is dead set against this kind of book appearing at all. And for it to appear and feel so complete, all the more amazing. If you're interested in architect lives, here is an architect that you have definitely not read a biography of this person. Okay, then this next one is part of a series. I've recommended this series many, many times. Again, I realize that this is a little bit on the exclusive side. This series is cutting-edge essays in various investigative fields, and the volumes are not only oversized but overpriced. They are expensive. So it would have to be exactly in your wheelhouse to actually want it, to actually, order it and get it. This is edited by David Pettigrew, William Caraher, and Thomas Davis, and it's the Oxford Handbook. It's the latest in the Oxford Handbook series of early Christian archaeology. As opposed to the Oxford Handbook series has done a couple of other early Christian books. The early Christian world, early Christian writings. This is the archaeology. This is the buildings, the walls, the graffiti, the potsherds, the baths, the pavement stones, the tombs and reliquaries. This is what we can reconstruct from what the early Christians, the first 2 centuries of Christianity, left behind. Their physical remains. So the Oxford Handbooks take the form of a big book that collects a whole bunch of essays on the subject from people in the field, from leaders in the field. I don't I've never really understood who these are for. They're too pricey to ask students to buy them in colleges, but they're also too abstruse to ask the general reader to buy. And yet, I've read probably 2 dozen of these, more. There are lots of them now. There might be over 100, and they are fantastic. If you like the subject, there's nothing like an Oxford Handbook. Just nothing. Whether it's ethical treatment of animals, or Edmund Spencer, or Dostoevsky, or Moby Dick, or whatever the Oxford Handbook is, they are incredible. And the problem with them, aside from the rarefied nature of their subjects and also their price tag, is the same problem that you'll get with any anthology, which is there'll be ups and downs. Some people in previous anthologies that I've read, late classical antiquity, that sort of thing, some of the people in those anthologies had a great deal more talent writing for a general audience than some others did. When you're casting about for the best people in the field, you will often get experts who are academics. And academics are atrocious at writing. It's almost a requirement of their job that they write almost impenetrably boring prose. Unfortunately, some of that is in here, so you just have to be prepared for that. I don't imagine there are many people who will get this book, but unlike this next one has a built-in enormous audience. This is Emily St. John Mandel. This is her new book, Sea of Tranquility, which is a split narrative, split in time between the past and a dreamy man with an aptitude for music, and the future, when there are ornate and beautiful cities on the moon. And there's a connection. Those of you familiar with this writer's writing will know that the connection is often tenuous and beautifully realized at the end. This is not one of those authors, one of those contemporary authors I always complain about on this channel, who cannot land the bird. This is not one of those authors. Emily St. John Mandel has a wonderful talent for crafting a whole book and giving you a heck of an ending that really makes you glad you finished the book, whether it's a happy ending or not. This is her new book. I've only read it the one time. I'll wait till I get the finished copy to really bear down on it. This next one I will not need to reread. This is a book in series. It's the closest. The Oxford Handbook of Christian Archaeology comes close to March of the Mammoths. It's a very big book. And this next one comes close to March Mystery Madness because it is a book in series about someone who does technically search for the solution to a crime. I might say they're more police procedurals or even police thrillers, action thrillers, than actual mysteries, but they would definitely fall under the umbrella of March Mystery Madness. This is a Joe Pickett novel. This is by C.J. Box, and it's called Shadows Reel. And it's the latest book starring game warden Joe Pickett, who's the quintessential, good man in a rough spot. He has been from the very beginning. These books are fantastically well done. He has one adventure after another. He has an extended family. They are often caught up in his adventures. And the backbone of the series is just an old-fashioned good versus evil. There are some moral gray areas in these books, but they tend to be cleared up pretty cleanly. And the only caveat I would say here would be that I don't know. It's a little bit hard for me to really get a feel for it, but I don't think you should come into these books mid-series. I don't think that's true. The author would probably disagree with that, but I think if you're interested in this series, it's long now. This is in double digits by now. If you're interested in this series, if I were you, I would probably go all the way back to the first book and start there. As opposed to picking this up, there are, like for instance, this book has some plot threads that weave directly from the last two books. I don't know how much of that, I'm not in a position really to detect how much of that you would feel lost on if you read this without ever having read another Joe Pickett novel. So again, for this, in this situation, I would suggest that if you're hungry for a series that you're going to love, a series where there'll be many books with a new one every year, that sort of thing. There are plenty of readers who love that. I love that. Pick this as a series, but go back and start at the beginning. Would be my advice. In a couple of years, you'll have 20 books to read, which is always nice. Then we have an American Civil War book. I have a feeling I'm going to have to dig back into this book, but this is by Roger Lowenstein, and it's called Ways and Means, Lincoln and His Cabinet and the Financing of the Civil War. And the reason I'm going to have to, I read this and I liked it very much, but the reason I'm going to have to go back to it is because I have a suspicion. It's always hard to tell because it involves the passage of time, which is not happening, has not happened yet. I have a suspicion that this may be a genuinely important American Civil War book. And, no offense to the publishing industry, I know they have to make a buck, but I think those of you who know the subject matter will know there aren't many of those. The American publishing industry is full of Lincoln and American Civil War books every year. But the number of those books in any given year that is a genuinely important contribution to the subject is very small. That number is very small. That you can do one of these things and it can do well on the front tables of your Barnes & Noble without putting a lick of original thinking into it, without it being important in any way whatsoever. And I think the opposite is true here. I think this may be what you doing, baby? Huh? Do you want to get down here? Oh, there you go. I think this may be a genuinely important American Civil War book. It's about how Lincoln fought the war, but not the usual stuff. Not, both sides might be wrong, but both sides can't be right. Or if General McClellan's not using his army, I would like to borrow it, or any of the usual chestnuts. It isn't that. It's rather, what was the state of the Treasury when war broke out? What was the state of the U.S. currency when war broke out? How was money raised? What was the structure of taxes in the country? What kind of income could Lincoln expect? Lincoln, who was embarked on a war. Wars are notoriously, outrageously expensive. What kind of income could he expect, and how could he expect to make that income? All sorts of questions that I swear I've read a million books on the American Civil War, and there were questions in this book that this author raises and answers that I'd never even thought of before. I'd never even thought to ask them before. I know it's a hackneyed thing for a reviewer to say, but I honestly think that what's the worst way to put it? If you read one American Civil War book this year, you should probably make it this one. If you're a serious student of this subject, you should certainly put this on your list. It's going to reposition things in ways that you really didn't expect, which is always refreshing in a subject on such well-trod ground as the American Civil War. And then we'll finish up with this. This is a little bit, it's not in my wheelhouse at all. I will go into it with a great deal of skepticism. This is by Daniel Amen, MD, and it's called You, Happier. The 7 Neuroscience Secrets of Feeling Good Based on Your Brain Type. And I have my issues with that right from the beginning. Right from the beginning. Feeling good is not you feeling happier. The two aren't the same. The idea that you should feel happy all the time, even happier than you were yesterday, happier than your normal state of happy, is not a medical idea. That idea was created by drug companies in order to sell you chemicals designed to produce some sort of feeling like that. That idea was bought and sold into the PDR because of money. Because drug companies, gigantic drug companies, with millions of dollars to expend on hospital boards and PR campaigns and individual doctors who may need, help with a student loan or help with a kid's braces or whatever, they have had billions of dollars to spend on making you think that if you're not happy or even happier every day, then, well, you've got a medical condition, and we've got the pill. We've got just the thing for you. It's not a medical thing at all. And that part, that you happier, is part of what makes me suspicious. The other part is that falderall in the subtitle. There's only one brain. You don't have brain types. There's only one brain. I worry that reading this, I'm going to see your daily newspaper horoscope, only jazzed up with medical jargon. And I don't want to see that. Books like these, I think, ultimately only hurt their readers. Because books like these, I don't know, I will have to read it and report back, but books of this type tend to further the narrative that your natural neurochemical state is happier all the time. And that isn't true. That absolutely isn't true. You can feel down without having depression. You can feel unhappy or blah during a day without needing a pill. The only reason that you even partially might think that is because the big pharma companies have worked hard to make you think that those are, rather than momentary dispositions, medical conditions that need treating with money. And if that is not one of the underlying assumptions in this book, I'll be amazed. I'll be pleased, but I'll be amazed. I've read a lot of these things, and that is always the assumption, that you are not entitled to have a bad day. That having a bad day is a sign that you need to go to the doctor. That is absurd and unbelievably, brutally harmful. So not to say that this book is those things. I don't know. I haven't read it, so we will that is quite enough vitriol for one Friday release. Good Lord. I was talking, I think, about escapism. I certainly wasn't giving you any opportunity for escape now, was I? But maybe Friday reads next week will be a little warmer and fuzzier. We'll have to hope for that. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up and let you decompress, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.